He used to say trust was his love language. I remember the way he'd laugh when I'd jokingly check his phone, that calm, confident look in his eyes, the kind that made you feel foolish for even doubting him. I should have recognized it sooner, that quiet performance of reassurance, the way his words always landed a little too perfectly. But love has a way of making you deaf to the tone of warning in your own gut. And one night, long after I thought our past mistakes were behind us, something appeared on my screen that made my hands go cold. Not a message, not a confession, but an image I never expected to see again. Let's say his name was Adam. We met at a time when my heart had grown cautious. The kind of cautious that looks like independence on the surface, but is really just exhaustion underneath. I'd been through enough half-hearted connections to stop expecting anything real. And then Adam appeared, steady, composed, with that quiet confidence that made people around him lean in just a little closer. He wasn't loud or flashy. He was thoughtful in a way that felt rare. When we talked, he listened like he was collecting every word. I mistook that for safety. He told me he was tired of the games, too. Said he deleted all the dating apps before we even met, as if that simple act made him purer, more intentional. "I'm ready for something real," he said one night, his voice low, like a secret between us. I wanted to believe that sentence more than I wanted to verify it. Because when you've been hurt before, a man who sounds sure of himself can feel like a cure. Those early months were warm, full of small rituals that made us feel like a team. Sunday morning coffees, grocery runs that turned into laughter in the frozen aisle, texts that began and ended each day like punctuation marks to our growing story. I started to trust the rhythm of us, the predictability of shared routines that made life feel stable again. And I told myself that the past, both his and mine, didn't matter as long as we were choosing each other now. I remember our first anniversary like it was a film scene burned into my mind. The soft hum of the restaurant, the low golden light, his fingers tracing small circles on my wrist as he talked about our future. "You make me want to be better," he'd said. The moment felt sincere. When the waitress offered to take our photo, I laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh that comes only when you think you're safe. That photo became more than a memory. It became a symbol of how far we'd come from the uncertainty of those first months. I framed it, posted it once, let it live quietly in my camera roll, untouched, untainted. But security can be a strange illusion. It lulls you into thinking the storm has passed when it's only circling the block. Around that time, I began noticing tiny shifts in his energy, the pauses between texts, the hollow, "I'm just tired," that replaced real conversation. He was physically there but emotionally blurred, like someone slightly out of focus. And every time I asked if something was wrong, he smiled, that soft, careful smile, the one meant to calm, not confess. There's something deeply unsettling about sensing the ground tilt under your feet while everyone around you insists you're imagining it. That's what loving Adam started to feel like, a slow, silent slipping. I'd see him glance at his phone with that subtle flick of the thumb, the one that hides whatever you're not supposed to see, and my stomach would not. But I swallowed it down because I didn't want to be that kind of girlfriend, the paranoid one, the one who ruins good things by asking hard questions. Looking back, I realized the truth doesn't usually crash into your life all at once. It drips, one inconsistency at a time, until you're drenched in what you didn't want to believe. That night, when my screen lit up and I saw the image that froze my pulse, I understood that peace built on denial was never peace at all. It was a performance I'd been helping him maintain, and in a single instant, that performance was over. I didn't move right away after seeing that photo. The light from the screen washed over my hands, turning my skin pale and unreal, as if I were looking at someone else's life. Our anniversary photo. The one I thought only existed on my phone. The one that used to make me smile when I scrolled past it late at night. And now it was sitting there, on a dating profile that didn't belong to me. I stared at it so long that my reflection blurred in the glass of the screen. At first my brain tried to rationalize. Maybe it was old, Maybe someone stole his picture. Maybe I was misunderstanding everything, because the alternative hurt too much to process. I even laughed a little, one of those short, breathless sounds people make when they're about to fall apart. But deep down, I already knew. You don't mistake your own life when you see it reflected through someone else's lie. My heart started doing that slow, heavy pounding, the kind that doesn't race, just weighs. I set the phone down on the table next to the framed photo of the same night. It felt like some cruel, split-screen version of my reality, the life I thought I was living versus the one I was suddenly standing in. I wanted to call him, to demand an explanation, but I also wanted silence. I needed the air around me to stop moving long enough for my thoughts to catch up. The next morning, I went through the motions like everything was fine. Coffee, shower, lipstick, work emails. My body was functioning, but my mind kept looping that image. His face, my smile, our dinner that night, the caption beneath it, looking for someone real. The words felt like a blade, disguised as sincerity. I could almost hear him saying them in that calm, steady tone he always used when he wanted to sound honest. When he came home that evening, I studied him the way people study strangers, looking for clues in every gesture. He greeted me with a kiss, light, practiced. His jacket smelled faintly of cologne and rain. "Long day?" I asked, pretending to scroll through my phone, though my pulse betrayed me. He nodded, loosened his tie, smiled. That perfect, disarming smile that used to make me feel safe. I wondered how many people had seen that same smile through a screen. We ate dinner in silence, the kind of silence that hums under your skin. He talked about traffic, about a coworker, about plans for the weekend, meaningless noise, perfectly timed to fill the gaps. I nodded and smiled in all the right places. If he noticed the tremor in my hands when I reached for my glass, he didn't mention it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I watched him from the edge of the bed, his face half hidden in shadow, phone plugged in on the nightstand. My phone sat beside it, black screen reflecting nothing. I reached for it once, to check, to confirm again, but stopped. I already knew what I'd find. What unsettled me most wasn't the image itself, but how calm he looked sleeping beside me, like someone who'd already made peace with a lie he planned to keep. When dawn finally broke, pale and cold through the blinds, I realized something had shifted irreversibly. The version of him I'd been defending, trusting, forgiving, that version was gone. What was left was silence, habit, and a man I no longer recognized. And yet somehow, I still couldn't walk away, not yet, because love, even when it's dying, has a way of convincing you that maybe it's just tired. Before everything twisted, before that photo turned my stomach inside out, there was a time when being with Adam felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. We met in the least romantic way imaginable, through mutual friends at a backyard get-together, where the grill smoke kept stinging everyone's eyes, and the music was too loud for small talk. He'd made some dry joke about the burnt burgers, and I laughed harder than it deserved. It wasn't that the joke was funny, it was that his voice carried that kind of quiet confidence that instantly makes you listen. He wasn't the type who demanded attention. He stood slightly off to the side, watching more than talking, and somehow that made him magnetic. By the time the night ended, we were sitting on the back steps, shoes off, sharing stories like two people who'd skipped a few steps in the getting-to-know-you process. There was something steady about him, an ease I hadn't felt in years. I'd been through my share of half-promises and emotional guessing games, so someone who didn't make me feel like a test I was about to fail felt like relief. Our first few weeks together felt like a pattern finally aligning. He was attentive but not overwhelming, confident without arrogance. He remembered details, my favorite wine, the book I'd been reading, the way I liked to sleep with one leg out of the blanket. He sent good morning texts, made me playlists, and never left me wondering where I stood. I told myself this is what it means to find a grown man, someone who means what he says. And for a while, he did. We spent whole weekends together in our own little orbit, cooking breakfast late, walking through open markets, getting rained on during Sunday drives, because neither of us remembered an umbrella. He had this habit of singing along quietly to songs he barely knew, off-key, but with conviction. I used to tease him for it, and he'd laugh, promising to learn the lyrics next time. Those tiny, forgettable moments are the ones that haunt you later, because they're proof that once things were good, before the truth turned everything sour. He told me he'd been single for a while. I tried the apps for a bit, he admitted, but it's all noise. I deleted them. I remember smiling, feeling proud of him for that, as if deleting a few icons on a screen proved emotional maturity. I even joked that I'd done the same, though my account had been untouched for months. Then it's fate, he said, raising his glass. Two people who gave up on the same nonsense. It felt innocent, a shared relief. I didn't realize that sentence would come back like an echo I'd regret ever hearing. The first time I saw his apartment, I noticed how curated it felt. Not messy, not sterile, just intentional. Framed photos of travel, an expensive-looking candle on the coffee table, perfectly folded throws. It looked lived in, but not too lived in. I remember thinking, he's ready for something real. It didn't occur to me then that people who build perfect spaces sometimes do it to distract from the chaos they keep elsewhere. He had a way of making the world smaller, safer. He listened when I talked about work stress, about family drama, even about my fears of getting hurt again. You're safe with me, he'd said once, simple and certain, and I believed it, not because of the words, but because of the quiet that followed. He made safety sound effortless. For months, life with him was calm, predictable, but in the best way. Dinner dates that always ended with slow walks home, movie nights where we never finished the film, small touches that felt like promises. My friends would tease me about how glowy I looked, and maybe I did. There's a particular light in your eyes when you think the worst is behind you. It's cruel, looking back, realizing how many moments were foreshadowing disguised as tenderness. The night he told me, half asleep, that he, quote, wasn't good at relationships but was trying to be better. The afternoon he laughed too quickly when a dating app notification popped up on a stranger's phone near us and said, God, remember those days? I'd smiled then, not knowing that someday I'd relive that sentence in a very different way. For a long time, I thought that version of us was the truth, that love, when it's steady, means it's safe. I didn't know that safety can also be the quietest disguise of all. Falling for Adam felt like drifting into calm water after years of swimming against the current. He made ordinary life feel cinematic, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent things. Saturday mornings with pancakes that always burned a little on the edges. Late night drives with the windows down, his hand resting lightly over mine on the console. Conversations that wandered from movies to childhood to the kind of future we both claimed we didn't believe in, but still described in too much detail. I remember thinking, so this is what it's supposed to feel like. Easy, familiar, safe. He was thoughtful in ways that seemed almost old-fashioned. He'd warm my coffee mug before pouring it, remember which side of the bed I liked, and send small check-in texts throughout the day. Made it to work? Don't skip lunch. It was the kind of care that builds slowly, like a song that doesn't need a chorus to stay in your head. Every moment with him reinforced this quiet narrative, that I'd finally met someone steady, someone who saw me not as a challenge, but as a home. And yet, there were moments, barely, there pauses, that didn't fit, little inconsistencies that floated by too quickly to grab onto. Once, when I asked about a weekend trip he'd mentioned before, he blinked too long before answering. Oh, that got canceled, he'd said casually, changing the subject with a kiss. Another time, he told me he'd never been much of a texter, even though he'd once flooded my phone with messages. When I pointed that out playfully, he smiled and said that was different. I was trying to impress you. At the time, I laughed it off. We all get comfortable, right? Love settles. Communication shifts. Life gets busier. But something in the tone of those small lies stuck to me. Not loud enough to cause a fight, just sharp enough to leave a faint scratch. The first time he pulled away physically, I noticed it instantly. We were lying on the couch, movie playing softly in the background, my head resting on his chest. Usually, he'd trace patterns on my arm or play with my hair without realizing it. That night, his hands stayed still. When I looked up, his eyes were open, focused on nothing. I whispered his name, and he blinked like someone waking up. "Sorry," he said, smiling faintly. "Just tired." It was such a normal answer, but I remember the strange chill that followed, the feeling that something I couldn't name had shifted. Still, I told myself relationships evolve. People get distracted. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe something at work was bothering him. I wanted to believe that love didn't have to be constant fireworks to be real, so I ignored the flicker of unease that kept sparking at the edge of my thoughts. When he invited me to meet his family that summer, it felt like a confirmation that things were fine. His mother was warm and kind, his father quiet but polite. They adored him. That much was obvious. During dinner, his mom smiled at me and said, "He talks about you all the time." I glanced at Adam then, and the way he looked back. A small, proud grin, a hand resting lightly over mine, made my doubts evaporate. I thought, see, this is what trust looks like. The weekend was perfect, too perfect, and perfection has a way of blinding you. I didn't notice how carefully he avoided certain topics. His past, his exes, the few vague years before we met. When I asked once about an old relationship, he brushed it off with a quick, "We wanted different things." I didn't push. I didn't want to ruin the peace we'd built. In hindsight, I can trace every warning sign, every small deflection, every overly smooth answer, and see the outline of what was coming. But at the time, I was too busy being grateful, too desperate to prove that love didn't always end in heartbreak. So I ignored the patterns, the tiny alarms, the feeling that I was loving someone whose truth was always half a step out of reach. The night before our first anniversary, he held me close and whispered, "You make me better." I remember believing him completely, thinking that maybe for once I wasn't being naive. I couldn't have known then that the man holding me wasn't changing at all. He was just getting better at pretending. The shift didn't happen all at once. It crept in quietly, almost politely, the way dusk slips into daylight without announcing itself. I remember the first time I felt it, that faint but undeniable sense of being an outsider in my own relationship. We were having dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and wine, the kind of evening we'd had dozens of times before. He was talking about work, about some new project, and a colleague named Emma, who just got promoted. He said her name like it was punctuation, too often, too casually. I caught it instantly. He smiled as he spoke, a different kind of smile, one that didn't quite include me. That night, when he reached for my hand, it felt delayed, like a reflex, not a choice. I remember studying our joined hands under the warm light of the kitchen, wondering when something so familiar had started to feel staged. I told myself I was imagining things, that jealousy could twist anything into evidence. But something about his tone, the ease, the faint excitement, didn't sound like a man talking about work. It sounded like a spark he was trying to downplay. After that night, his schedule grew unpredictable. Late meetings, client dinners, quick showers before bed. The details never added up, but they were never suspicious enough to confront directly. I became fluent in self-reassurance. "You're overthinking. He's just busy. You should trust him." But trust, once cracked, doesn't heal clean. It leaves jagged edges you keep cutting yourself on. I started noticing how often his phone was in his hand. How his laugh, that quiet, private laugh, would surface when he was scrolling, then vanish the second I entered the room. I'd ask something innocent, like, "What's funny?" and he'd shake his head, mutter, "Nothing, just a meme." But the way he held the screen tilted away from me said otherwise. It wasn't the secrecy that hurt most. It was the calmness with which he carried it, like deceit had become part of his routine. Once, on a Sunday morning, I caught a glimpse of a notification before he swiped it away. Just a name, no message. It wasn't one I recognized. I asked, gently, what it was. He barely looked up. "Wrong number," he said, smiling. Then he leaned in, kissed my forehead, and said, "You really need to relax." That sentence landed harder than he meant it to. It sounded like dismissal, disguised as affection. I laughed to keep things light, but the air between us thinned after that, stretched and brittle. The first real argument came weeks later. It started over something stupid, me asking why he hadn't answered my call the night before. "My phone died," he said too quickly. I was exhausted. I told him I'd waited up. Worried. He sighed, the kind of sigh that says you're being unreasonable. "You know I love you," he added, reaching for me. His touch was gentle, but his eyes weren't. They were calculating, watching how easily I'd accept the lie, and I did. I told myself people forget to charge their phones all the time. I even apologized for overreacting. That's the cruel thing about manipulation. You end up apologizing for the things that hurt you. After that, I started noticing my own behavior changing. I'd check his social media more often, scroll through his tagged photos, pay attention to who liked his posts. I hated how paranoid I felt, how the person I was becoming, careful, watchful, constantly editing myself. But when you sense dishonesty, even silence starts sounding like confession. The night it really hit me, we were sitting on the couch. He was scrolling, smirking slightly, lost in his screen. The TV was on, but neither of us was watching. I asked softly, "Who are you talking to?" He didn't even look up. "Just friends," he said. His voice was calm, detached, the tone people use when they've already decided you don't deserve the truth. I smiled, nodded, played along, but inside, something cracked. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, final, the sound of something breaking that had been straining for too long. That night, when he fell asleep, I lay awake beside him, the blue glow of his phone reflecting faintly off the wall. The screen lit up once, then twice. Messages I couldn't see, laughter I couldn't hear. And for the first time since we met, I realized that trust doesn't die from one betrayal. It dies from 1,000 little ones that no one ever confesses to. After that night, everything between us took on a strange stillness, the kind that hums with tension, even in silence. We moved around each other carefully, like roommates performing the choreography of love we both still pretended to believe in. He still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still asked how my day was, still told me he loved me before bed. But the pauses were longer now, the warmth thinner, like a script he'd memorized but no longer felt. It's astonishing how quickly you can start doubting your own perception. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and glance at his phone on the nightstand, lit just enough to show the outline of a notification. I'd lie there, still as possible, listening to his breathing, wondering who else had a place in the quiet parts of his life. Sometimes I'd tell myself, if you're wrong, you'll ruin everything. Other times, if you're right, it's already ruined. Neither version brought peace. The emotional distance between us grew in small, almost invisible increments. He started canceling plans at the last minute, always for work. Texts that once came with heart emojis turned into one-word replies, and when I'd try to start real conversations, his answers skimmed the surface. "I'm fine. It's just been a long day." His voice was calm, steady, polite, the tone you use with strangers, not the person who knows what your laugh sounds like when you're half asleep. I remember one weekend vividly, the first time I truly felt alone with him. We'd planned a short getaway, something simple, just to reconnect. He'd picked the place, a small cabin near the lake, quiet, no cell signal. "It'll be good for us," he'd said. I packed with hope. But from the moment we arrived, it was clear his mind was elsewhere. He checked his phone constantly, walking out onto the porch every time he thought I wasn't looking. When I asked what was wrong, he smiled, that same, empty smile, and said, "Just unplugging is harder than I thought." That night, while he showered, I sat by the window, watching the reflection of his phone's light flicker through the half-open bathroom door. He'd said there was no signal, but the glow kept changing, messages coming in, one after another. My chest tightened. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. You don't have to open a door to know when something on the other side doesn't belong to you anymore. The next morning, he was unusually affectionate. Made breakfast, kissed the top of my head, joked like nothing was wrong. I wanted to ask him outright, "Who are you texting? What are you hiding?" But the words caught in my throat. Part of me didn't want the truth. I just wanted the version of him who used to look at me without guilt in his eyes, so I stayed quiet. Silence felt safer than confirmation. But silence doesn't last. It builds pressure. One evening back home, he came in late again, smelling faintly of perfume. Not mine. I noticed it the moment he hugged me, something sharp and floral. My stomach twisted, but my face stayed neutral. "You smell nice," I said quietly, watching for a reaction. He froze for half a second, then smiled. "One of my coworkers sprayed something in the office," he said, laughing it off too fast. My heart didn't believe him, but my voice pretended it did. That night, after he fell asleep, I picked up his jacket from the chair. My hands trembled as I brought it closer. Not because I was looking for proof, but because I already knew I'd find it. A faint trace of something unfamiliar lingered there, clinging stubbornly to the fabric. It wasn't evidence. It was a ghost, one that smelled like the beginning of an ending. For days after, I moved through life in a kind of fog. I went to work, met deadlines, smiled at friends, all while carrying a quiet ache in my chest that no one could see. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was him. Not because I missed him, but because I wanted to know what version of himself I'd get that day. The attentive one? The distant one? The liar? There's a moment when you stop trying to prove something is wrong and start collecting the pieces of the truth in silence. I wasn't ready to confront him yet, but I had already started paying attention. And when you start watching closely, the lies stop blending in with the noise. They begin to shine under the light of what you no longer want to deny. It happened on a night that began like any other, quiet, unremarkable, the kind of evening that tricks you into believing nothing will change. I was sitting at the dining table with my laptop open, pretending to work, while Adam scrolled through his phone on the couch. The hum of the television filled the space between us, a soft, meaningless sound. Every few minutes, his screen would light up, and he'd tilt it just slightly away from me, not enough to look suspicious, just enough to make me notice. I told myself I was being paranoid, that staring too long at the back of his phone wouldn't change the truth. But that night, something in me, the quiet, observant part that had been collecting evidence in silence, finally refused to look away. When he went to shower, leaving his phone face down on the armrest, I just sat there staring at it. The seconds stretched thin. My pulse was so loud it drowned out everything else. For months, I'd avoided this exact moment, the one where instinct demanded proof and conscience begged me to stop. But avoidance had only delayed the inevitable. The truth was already living in the room with us. I just hadn't opened the door to let it speak. My hand moved before I decided to. I picked up the phone, the familiar weight of it cold in my palm. The screen was still warm, the kind of warmth that tells you something has just been used. I pressed the power button, and his lock screen lit up. A notification banner still visible. A name I didn't know. A message that started with "Can't stop thinking about last night." For a moment, everything went silent. My body didn't react, it just froze, like my brain had stopped sending signals. The words didn't even hurt at first. They were too surreal to translate. I read them again, then again, as if repetition might make them mean something else. My fingers felt numb, my throat dry. When I finally remembered how to breathe, the sound that left my chest wasn't a sob. It was smaller than that. A quiet, broken exhale. I should have stopped there. But something inside me, that stubborn, trembling mix of disbelief and fury, kept going. The phone unlocked easily. I'd seen his passcode 100 times before. My reflection in the screen looked like a stranger's. Wide eyes, tight jaw, heartbreak already taking shape. The messages were there, dozens of them. Late-night chats, compliments, inside jokes, plans, and then photos, blurry, intimate, careless. One of them stopped me cold, my own picture, our anniversary photo. The same one framed in our living room. Except here, it was cropped and captioned, "This was one of the best nights I ever had." He'd sent it to her. The same image that once symbolized everything true between us was now just bait in a story he'd sold to someone else. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was methodical, strategic. It wasn't that he'd simply cheated. It was that he'd repurposed our love, recycled it into someone else's fantasy. I scrolled through the chat, feeling my pulse in my fingertips. Every word was a small, sharp cut. When I heard the shower turn off, I set the phone down slowly, like handling something fragile and radioactive. My heart was racing, but my face was calm. I didn't want him to know yet. Not like this. Not until I decided how the truth would land. He came out of the bathroom, towel draped over his shoulders, humming to himself. "Hey," he said, smiling, "you're still up?" His voice was light, casual. The same man I'd loved for 2 years, standing just a few feet away, completely unaware that I'd just seen who he really was. I looked at him then, really looked at the easy posture, the damp hair, the confidence of someone who still believed he was untouchable. And something inside me shifted from grief to clarity. I realized this was the moment everything stopped being about us. It was now about me, and how I would choose to end the performance he'd been directing all along. He didn't notice right away. He tossed his towel onto the chair, scrolling through his phone as if nothing about the world had shifted. I sat there, still, watching him unlock the same screen I just held in my hands. My pulse was steady, too steady, the way it gets when your body knows something dangerous is about to happen, but your mind hasn't caught up. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was waiting. "Dinner was great," he said casually, glancing over his shoulder. "Thanks for cooking." The words sounded ordinary, almost gentle. And for a brief, surreal moment, I wondered if I could pretend, if I could keep this fragile peace for one more night and deal with it tomorrow. But then he smiled, the same easy, confident smile I'd seen in that chat, and the air in my chest snapped. "How was your night?" I asked softly. He looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" I tilted my head. "You seemed busy." He chuckled. "Work never ends, huh?" He still didn't see it. The warning in my voice, the quiet tremor beneath every syllable. He thought it was just another evening, another conversation where he'd charm his way past suspicion. "Who's Megan?" I asked. The name hung there between us, light as a feather, heavy as a confession. He blinked, once, twice, then forced a laugh. "Megan, what? Oh, come on, seriously? That's just someone from work." It was the tone that broke me. Not defensive, not guilty, but bored, like explaining away a lie had become routine. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just said, very quietly, "She texted you, about last night." The color drained from his face so fast I almost felt sorry for him. He tried to recover, mouth opening to form the next lie, but I didn't let him. I saw the messages. I said, my voice low but steady, "All of them." Silence. Then, the most cowardly instinct of all, denial. "You went through my phone?" he said, eyes narrowing. "That's insane. Do you even hear yourself?" I almost laughed. The absurdity of it, of watching him flip the narrative so effortlessly, would have been impressive if it weren't so familiar. He stepped closer, his tone sharpening. "You don't trust anyone. That's the real problem. You create drama out of nothing." Nothing. That word echoed in my head. Nothing. Like the anniversary photo he'd sent her was nothing. Like the nights I waited for him, wondering if he was safe, were nothing. Like I was nothing. "I know what I saw," I said quietly. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose, the universal gesture of a man pretending to be patient. "It's not what you think." "It never is," I said. For a second, we just stared at each other. No shouting, no crying. Just two people standing in the wreckage of a story that had finally told the truth. He opened his mouth, probably to spin one last excuse, but stopped when he saw my face. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. I walked past him to the kitchen, the sound of my footsteps loud against the floor. My hands were trembling now, not from fear but from release. I picked up my keys from the counter, the same spot where his phone had been minutes before. "I'm going for a drive," I said. "Can we please talk about this?" His voice cracked a little. the first honest sound I'd heard from him in months. "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied. "You already said everything to her." He reached for my arm, but I stepped back. His eyes were wide now, pleading, desperate to pull me back into the illusion he'd built. But illusions don't survive the truth. As I walked toward the door, he said my name, softly, then louder, as if volume could undo what he'd done. I didn't turn around. My hands were shaking so hard the keys rattled. My vision blurred for a second, but I blinked it clear. The night air outside was cold, sharp, grounding. I stood there on the porch, feeling the weight of silence wrap around me. Behind me, through the window, I could still see him, motionless, staring at the door like he was waiting for a cue that would never come. For the first time in months, I didn't wait for him to speak. I didn't need closure or an explanation or a promise he'd never keep. The only thing I needed was space wide enough to breathe in the truth. And as the car engine hummed to life, I realized something simple and brutal. Love doesn't always end when someone betrays you. Sometimes it ends the moment you finally stop lying to yourself. The drive that night felt endless. The highway lights blurred into soft golden streaks against the windshield, and the radio hummed quietly under the sound of my thoughts unraveling. I wasn't crying. I thought I would. I thought the tears would come like they always do when something breaks. But they didn't. Maybe I'd spent them already. Over all those nights, I waited for him to come home, convincing myself nothing was wrong. What I felt now wasn't sadness. It was an eerie calm, like my body finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I ended up parking near the lake on the edge of town, the same one where we'd once spent a weekend together, pretending to be the couple everyone thought we were. The water was black and still, the air sharp enough to sting my skin. I sat there for a long time, engine off, keys still in my hand. Every sound felt amplified, the ticking of the cooling metal, the faint rustle of wind through the trees. Somewhere in that stillness, the anger began to fade, replaced by something heavier but cleaner. Acceptance. When I finally drove home hours later, the house looked different. Not physically. Everything was exactly where it had always been, but it felt stripped of something invisible. The walls that once echoed our laughter now just held silence. His jacket was still on the chair, his shoes by the door. All the little signs of someone's life scattered through mine, each one a reminder of the version of us that no longer existed. He was sitting on the couch when I walked in, elbows on his knees, phone in his hands. His eyes were red, like he'd been crying, though I didn't ask. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he stood, started talking fast. Apologies, explanations, half-truths stitched together in a panic. "It didn't mean anything," he said. "It was stupid. I was stupid. I didn't want to lose you." There was a time when those words would have cracked me open, when I would have fought for him, begged for clarity, dissected every detail until I could understand why. But standing there in that dim living room, I realized I no longer cared about why. The damage wasn't about what he'd done. It was about how long I'd been trying not to see it. "I believed you," I said quietly, "every single time." He stepped closer, voice trembling. "I can fix this." I shook my head. "You can't fix what you destroyed," while pretending nothing was wrong. The silence that followed felt final. He didn't argue. Maybe because he knew there was nothing left to say. He just stood there, staring at me, like if he looked long enough, I might change my mind. But I didn't. I couldn't. I packed a bag that night. Just essentials. Clothes, my toothbrush, the framed photo from our anniversary that I'd once thought captured forever. I didn't take it because I wanted to keep it. I took it because I couldn't leave it behind for him to rewrite again. When I closed the suitcase, the sound echoed louder than I expected. He didn't stop me. Maybe he was too stunned. Maybe he knew this wasn't an argument he could win. As I walked to the door, he said my name, soft, pleading, and I almost turned. But then I remembered every moment I'd chosen silence over truth, every lie I'd excused because I loved him, and I kept walking. Outside, the air was cold but clear. For the first time in months, I could actually feel it fill my lungs. I drove without a destination, windows down, the night swallowing the noise behind me. And somewhere between one town and the next, I realized that freedom doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it's just quiet. A steady pulse reminding you that you're still alive, still moving, still capable of beginning again. By the time dawn began to stretch across the horizon, I wasn't thinking about him anymore. I was thinking about myself, about how long it had been since I'd woken up without worry sitting on my chest, about how strange it felt to exist without someone else's shadow darkening the room. That morning, as the sun bled into the sky, I finally felt the first trace of something I hadn't felt in months. Not joy, not even peace, just possibility. And maybe that was enough to start with. In the days that followed, the silence became its own kind of company. Mornings were the hardest. Waking up to an empty space where his voice used to be, where his half-drunk coffee would still be cooling on the counter. I kept expecting the sound of the front door, the creak of his footsteps, the small, ordinary noises that had once meant home. But they never came. Instead, there was just quiet, raw, unfamiliar, but honest. The first few days were mechanical. Wake up, shower, work, eat something that barely passed as food. People at the office asked if I was okay, and I told them yes, smiling that kind of thin, distant smile that keeps questions away. It wasn't until I caught myself deleting old photos on my lunch break that the truth of it really sank in. Every picture felt like a betrayal of memory, not because he was in them, but because I looked so certain. I wasn't angry in those moments. I was mourning the version of myself who still believed in him. Nights were different, lonelier, but somehow softer. I'd light a candle, open the window, and just sit. No music, no noise. The quiet had weight to it, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like space, like something waiting to be filled with a life that wasn't orbiting around someone else. I started writing again. Nothing profound, just notes, fragments of thought, pieces of sentences I couldn't say out loud yet. It was messy, but it was mine. He texted a few times, short messages, cautious, testing the waters. Hope you're okay. I'm thinking about you. I didn't reply, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I knew any answer would drag me backward. He'd already said everything that mattered. Every lie, every apology, every half-truth dressed up as regret. There was nothing left to decode. The last time I saw him was 2 weeks later. He came to drop off a few of my things I'd left behind. A sweater, a book, a mug I'd bought on our first trip together. I met him outside, under the gray morning light. He looked smaller somehow, like the confidence had drained from him. "You look good," he said quietly, as if it surprised him. I nodded, not out of pride, but out of acknowledgement. "You don't have to explain," I told him. "I already know." He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him, for the version of himself that might have loved me, or tried to. But pity wasn't forgiveness. It was just a ghost of who I used to be. When he drove away, I stood there for a while, the air cool and still around me. The silence didn't feel empty this time. It felt earned, like something I'd fought my way back to. In the weeks that followed, I began rebuilding my life in quiet, deliberate ways. Small things first, changing the sheets, rearranging the furniture, painting the walls a new color. I started walking in the evenings again, headphones in, city lights reflecting on wet pavement. Every step felt like proof that I hadn't disappeared inside the wreckage he left behind. One night, months later, I found that framed photo, the one from our anniversary. I'd packed it away without realizing it, tucked deep in a box of things I didn't want to think about. I pulled it out and looked at it for a long time. The woman in the picture looked happy, yes, but also trusting in a way that made my chest ache. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I just whispered, "You didn't deserve that ending," and set it gently into the trash. That small act, quiet, final, felt like reclaiming something I'd lost long before he betrayed me. Sometimes closure doesn't arrive with grand speeches or perfect explanations. Sometimes it's found in the silence after you stop waiting for them. It's in the steadiness of your own breath when you realize you don't need answers to move forward. And as the days grew longer, I caught myself smiling again, not because everything was fixed, but because I finally understood that healing isn't about erasing what happened. It's about making peace with the version of yourself that survived it. By the time summer rolled around, life had taken on a quieter rhythm, slower, steadier, mine. The mornings didn't sting anymore. I still woke early, still made coffee, still caught myself glancing toward the door sometimes, but the absence had softened. What once felt like emptiness now felt like space. It's strange how grief, when given enough time, starts to look like freedom. I rented a new apartment, small, with creaky floors and too much sunlight. The first night I moved in, I sat on the floor among unpacked boxes, eating takeout straight from the container, and realized I wasn't waiting for anything. Not a call, not a text, not an apology, just silence, pure and undemanding. For the first time in years, it felt like peace. I started doing little things I'd stopped doing without noticing. Playing music while cooking, buying fresh flowers for no reason, reading before bed instead of scrolling through my phone. I even joined a pottery class, something I'd once mentioned wanting to try, back when Adam had smiled and said, "You'd never stick with it." Now every Thursday, I sat at that clay-stained table with my hands covered in earth, shaping something imperfect and whole. It was slow, messy, grounding. And it reminded me that rebuilding isn't always about grand transformations. Sometimes it's just about choosing yourself again, one quiet evening at a time. My friends started saying I looked lighter. I didn't know if they meant physically or emotionally, but either way, they weren't wrong. I'd stopped carrying the invisible weight of trying to be someone's proof of love. I no longer checked my phone every few minutes. I no longer replayed his words, wondering where the truth began and the lie ended. That constant vigilance, that exhausting readiness to be hurt again, it finally let go of me. One afternoon, I ran into someone from our old circle, a mutual acquaintance. They mentioned Adam briefly, said he'd been around, said he'd asked about me once. I just nodded. There was no spike in my chest, no tightness in my throat, just the gentle awareness that I'd outgrown that entire story. The version of me who had once fought to be understood by him didn't exist anymore. She'd served her purpose, and quietly stepped aside. There were still moments, of course, unexpected flashes of memory, a scent, a song, a place we'd once been. They didn't hurt the way they used to. They just passed through me, like distant weather. Sometimes I even smiled at them. Not out of nostalgia, but gratitude. Because every painful thing he gave me had, in some strange way, pushed me closer to myself. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the buildings, I walked to the lake, the same one I'd parked by the night I left him. The water shimmered gold, calm and endless. I sat on the same bench, breathed in the warm air, and thought about how far I'd come. Healing doesn't announce itself. It sneaks up on you, in laughter that feels genuine again, in the way you hum without realizing, in how you stop glancing backward. It doesn't erase what happened, it just changes the meaning. The betrayal that once defined me had turned into a quiet boundary, a line between who I was and who I refused to be again. As the light faded, I watched the reflection of the sky ripple across the water. I thought about how easily I'd once mistaken comfort for love, attention for care, promises for truth, and for the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of it. I was human. I'd trusted, I'd hoped, I'd learned. The wind picked up, soft and warm, brushing strands of hair against my face. I closed my eyes and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because it finally didn't have to be. Some stories don't end with revenge or reconciliation. Some end quietly, with peace, with growth, with a woman sitting by a lake at sunset, finally realizing that being alone was never the same as being lonely. Sometimes I think about how small the moment was that changed everything. Just a glance at a phone, one flash of light across a screen. It's strange how quiet the beginning of an ending can be. For months, I thought that night had broken me. But now, looking back, I see it was the night I woke up. Healing isn't dramatic. It doesn't come with fireworks or sudden clarity. It happens in the small, invisible moments when you start choosing peace over pain, truth over illusion. It's when you stop rehearsing what you'd say if they called, and start remembering what your own voice sounds like when it isn't trembling. In the weeks after I left Adam, I used to wonder if he ever missed me, if he scrolled through old photos the way I did, if he felt even a fraction of the ache he left behind. But that question doesn't visit me anymore. Missing someone who betrayed you is like chasing echoes. They'll answer, but never with the truth. Eventually, you learn that closure isn't about getting answers from them. It's about giving yourself permission to stop asking. I've realized something simple. Love doesn't fail when someone lies to you. It fails when you start lying to yourself to protect them. I did that for too long, silencing my instincts, softening my boundaries, mistaking his calm for care. It took losing him to understand that trust isn't about believing someone blindly. It's about believing yourself when something feels wrong. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone I actually recognize. The lines around my eyes are a little deeper, but they belong to someone who's lived through the unraveling and didn't let it ruin her softness. I'm not bitter. I'm clearer. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of carrying it. I still believe in love, not the kind that hides behind pretty words or filtered pictures, but the kind that shows up honestly, even when it's inconvenient. The kind that doesn't need proof, because it never makes you question your worth. Sometimes I think about that anniversary photo, the one he used on his new profile. How it started as proof of love and ended as evidence of betrayal. I don't have it anymore, but I don't need to. That image doesn't define me. What defines me is what came after. The quiet strength it took to walk away, the courage to rebuild without bitterness, the peace I found in my own company. I used to think love was about finding the right person. Now I know it's about being the right person, for yourself first and for someone who sees you clearly, not as a reflection of their need, but as a whole, unedited story. And if I've learned anything from all of this, it's that the truth, no matter how painful, will always be kinder than the lie you tell yourself to avoid it. So if you've ever stayed too long, ignored the signs, believed the promises that hurt to hold on to, you're not weak. You are trying to love in a world that often confuses possession for devotion. But the moment you choose yourself again, even quietly, the story changes. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't anger or confrontation or proving them wrong. It's becoming someone who no longer needs to. Has this ever happened to you? Share your story in the comments.